Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. The ground wasn't solid beneath me, it rippled like a memory half-formed. A muted glow suffused the space, casting shadows that didn't belong, as if the light had its own languid pulse. The air around me felt dense, as though it was brushing against my skin with deliberate intent. Each breath I took was silent, as though the air refused to be disturbed. My limbs seemed distant, responding before I commanded them, like someone else's echo. The silence deepened, pressing against me, whispering that I was not alone. I still feel them watching. Even now, as I speak into this recording device, my hands shake slightly when I hold it too close to my mouth. The tremor isn't from fear exactly, it's something deeper, like my body remembers something my mind keeps trying to forget. The walls of my room seem to breathe at night, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that doesn't match my heartbeat. I've learned to sleep with my back to the corner, both eyes on the door, though I know it won't help. The electronics started acting strange about a week after I returned. My radio turns itself on, always tuned to static that sounds almost like whispers. The refrigerator hums in frequencies that make my teeth ache. My phone screen flickers with messages that aren't there when I look directly at them. I've replaced the batteries in my flashlight 4 times, but it still dims whenever I need it most, as if something is drawing the power away. Sleep doesn't come easily anymore. When it does, I dream of that place, not the details. Never the details, just the feeling of being observed by something that understood me better than I understood myself. I wake with the taste of metal in my mouth and a sensation like cobwebs clinging to my thoughts. The dreams feel more real than this room, more solid than the bed I'm lying in. People don't believe me when I try to explain. They nod politely and suggest I see someone, get some help, take some time off. But their eyes avoid mine when they speak, as if they're afraid of what they might see reflected there. I've stopped trying to convince them. Some experiences can't be shared, only endured. The nights are the worst. Between the hours when the world sleeps and before it wakes, I hear the humming again. It starts low, almost below the threshold of hearing, then builds until it seems to come from inside my skull. I press my palms against my ears, but it doesn't help. The sound isn't traveling through air, it's traveling through me. I've been trying to piece together what happened out there, working backward through the fragments that remain. Memory is a strange thing. It protects you by hiding what you can't handle, but it also torments you with glimpses of what you're not supposed to remember. Each night, a little more surfaces, like debris washing up on a shore I don't want to visit. The figure is what I remember most clearly, though clearly might be the wrong word. It stood at the edge of my vision, never quite in focus, never quite gone, tall and impossibly still, like a shadow cast by something not entirely there. I couldn't make out features, couldn't determine if it was facing me or turned away, but I felt its attention like weight on my skin, patient and utterly alien. I remember trying to move, trying to call out, but my body wouldn't respond. Not paralyzed exactly, more like I was a passenger in my own flesh, watching someone else make the decisions. My arms hung at my sides, my feet remained planted in the soft earth, and my voice stayed locked behind teeth that wouldn't part. I could only observe as it observed me. The air around the figure seemed to bend, creating ripples in space that hurt to look at directly. Sometimes it appeared closer, sometimes farther, as if distance meant something different in its presence. I watched it for what felt like hours, though time had become unreliable, stretching and compressing like heated metal. Above us both, the sky held something that shouldn't have been there. Not a star, not a plane, not anything I had words for. It hung motionless, darker than the darkness around it, visible only by the way it blocked out the stars behind it. No lights, no sound, just a presence that made the air itself feel heavier. I knew, without understanding how I knew, that it was connected to the figure, that they were part of the same impossible equation. My memory fractures here, breaking apart like glass hit by something moving too fast to see. There are gaps, moments that exist as sensations without images, feelings without context. I remember the ground beneath me changing, becoming less solid, more like standing on the surface of water that had forgotten how to be wet. I remember my reflection looking wrong in puddles that hadn't been there moments before. Working further back, I can trace the signs I should have recognized. They started subtly, days before the main event, small disturbances that I dismissed as coincidence or imagination. The temperature would drop without warning, creating pockets of cold air that moved through the campsite like invisible visitors. My compass spun lazily, never settling on true north, as if the magnetic field itself had become confused. The wildlife went silent first. I noticed it on the second evening, though I didn't understand its significance then. No crickets, no owls, no rustling in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the air was too thick to carry sound properly. I sat by my small fire, listening to nothing, feeling watched by empty spaces between the trees. My equipment began malfunctioning in subtle ways. The camping stove took longer to ignite, the flame burning blue-green instead of its usual orange. My watch ran slow, losing minutes here and there until I stopped trusting it entirely. The zipper on my tent stuck, then moved too easily, sliding open by itself during the night. I'd wake to find the flap hanging loose, framing a view of stars that seemed dimmer than they should have been. The humming started then, so low I felt it more than heard it. It seemed to come from the ground itself, a vibration that traveled up through my bones and settled in my chest. I'd place my hand flat against the earth, feeling it pulse with a rhythm that wasn't quite regular, wasn't quite random. Sometimes it would stop for long minutes, leaving a silence so complete it felt aggressive. During those early days, I experienced moments of lost time. I'd be setting up camp, then suddenly find myself standing in a different spot with no memory of moving. Once I discovered my sleeping bag arranged differently than I'd left it, folded with a precision I didn't remember using. Small things, easily dismissed, but they accumulated like sediment in still water. The smells came next: ozone and heated metal, scents that had no business in a forest. They drift through the air in pockets, strong enough to make me look around for their source, then fade before I could locate them. Sometimes I caught hints of something else, something organic but unfamiliar, like flowers from a place that had never seen Earth's sun. I remember checking my supplies obsessively during those days, counting and recounting my food, my water, my batteries. Not because I thought I was running low, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was taking inventory alongside me. I'd find items moved slightly, rearranged in ways that might have been my own doing, but felt somehow deliberate, purposeful. My thoughts began to feel less private. Not that I heard other voices or felt an obvious intrusion, but my own internal monologue seemed to echo strangely, as if someone else was listening to it and finding it mildly interesting. I'd catch myself thinking in ways that felt foreign, considering questions I wouldn't normally ask, noticing details that seemed irrelevant but somehow important. The dreams started before the waking experiences, bleeding into my sleep with images that made no sense but felt significant. I'd see geometric patterns that hurt to remember, landscapes that followed rules different from physics, faces that weren't quite faces looking at me with expressions that weren't quite expressions. I'd wake feeling like I'd been somewhere else, somewhere far from the tent and the forest and anything I recognized. Going back even further to the very beginning, I can see how normal everything was. I remember the drive to the campsite, windows down, music playing, feeling excited about a few days away from everything. The forest looked inviting, peaceful, exactly what I'd hoped for. I remember thinking how quiet it would be, how good it would feel to disconnect for a while. I set up camp in a clearing that seemed perfect level ground, good drainage, close enough to the stream for water but far enough to avoid bugs. The trees formed a natural windbreak and there was a clear view of the sky for stargazing. Everything felt right, felt chosen. I unpacked methodically, taking my time, enjoying the simple pleasure of creating a temporary home in the wilderness. The first evening was exactly what I'd wanted. I built a small fire, cooked a simple meal, sat watching the flames dance while the forest settled into its nighttime rhythms. The stars emerged one by one, more visible here than they ever were in the city. I felt connected to something larger than myself, part of an ancient pattern of humans seeking solitude under open sky. I remember that last moment of pure contentment, sitting by the dying fire, feeling grateful for the silence and the solitude. The air was clean and cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth. My body was tired from the day's activities, ready for deep sleep in my comfortable sleeping bag. I banked the coals carefully, secured my food, and settled into my tent with the satisfaction of a day well spent. That was before the humming started, before the silence became something else, before I learned that solitude and being alone are not the same thing at all. I fell asleep that first night thinking I was the only conscious thing for miles around. I was wrong. And now, as I finish this recording, I can feel that familiar weight settling over me again. The walls are starting to breathe, and somewhere in the static between radio stations, something is trying to speak. They're still watching, still waiting, and I think they're getting closer, story 2. The floor swelled beneath me, rhythmically flexing in slow, deliberate waves. Light seeped from the walls, but not from any identifiable source, just a soft, enveloping haze that neither brightened nor dimmed. My skin tingled with an unfamiliar static, as though the air itself was breathing around me without disturbance. Each sensation felt preordained, alien to my own command. I could sense an awareness lingering behind the smooth, featureless surfaces, watching with an insidious patience, waiting to reveal itself. That memory comes back to me now, clear as glass, though it took me years to piece it together. Years to understand what I experienced in that place. I've never told anyone about this before, not the whole truth anyway. Every time I tried, the words would stick in my throat like they were being held back by something invisible. But I'm far away now, thousands of miles from where it happened, and I think enough time has passed. I think I'm finally ready to speak. I need to start from the beginning, though, before everything changed. Before I learned that some places exist in the spaces between what we think we know about the world. I was working as a technical consultant back then, traveling to remote facilities to troubleshoot equipment failures. It was solitary work, which suited me fine. I'd always preferred the company of machines to people. They were predictable, logical, fixable. When something broke, there was always a reason, always a solution. The assignment came through the usual channels. A research station in the mountains, completely isolated. Their communication array had been malfunctioning for weeks. Standard job, decent pay, and they were covering all expenses, including helicopter transport. The only unusual thing was how quickly they needed someone out there. Most places could wait a few days, but they insisted on immediate deployment. I remember the helicopter ride up through the clouds, watching the landscape shrink below until there was nothing but white peaks and endless sky. The pilot was quiet, professional. He'd done this run before, he said, though something in his voice suggested he didn't enjoy it. When we finally descended toward the station, I could see why someone might find the place unsettling. It was a cluster of low, concrete buildings connected by covered walkways, sitting on a plateau that seemed to float above the cloud line. Completely cut off from the world. The station manager met me at the landing pad, middle-aged, tired-looking, with the kind of pallor that comes from spending too much time indoors under artificial light. He shook my hand firmly but avoided eye contact, his gaze constantly drifting to the buildings behind me as if checking to make sure they were still there. "Glad you could make it so quickly," he said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter blades. "We really need this fixed." The pilot was already unloading my equipment, moving with obvious urgency. I asked him when he'd be back to pick me up. 3 days, he said, not looking at me, weather permitting. There was something final about the way he said it, like he was already gone. And then he was, the helicopter disappearing into the white haze, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt heavy. The station manager led me inside through a series of airlocks and corridors that all looked identical: white walls, fluorescent lighting, that institutional smell of recycled air and industrial cleaning products. He explained the setup as we walked: 12 staff members, rotating shifts, monitoring equipment I didn't need to understand. My job was simple: fix the communication array so they could resume regular contact with the outside world. "How long has it been down?" I asked. 3 weeks, he said, then paused. "Maybe 4. Time moves differently up here." I thought that was an odd way to phrase it, but isolation could do strange things to people's perception. I'd seen it before in remote installations: workers who'd been cut off too long, starting to think and speak in ways that didn't quite make sense to outsiders. He showed me to my quarters, a small room with a narrow bed, a desk, and a single window that looked out onto the connecting walkway to the next building. The glass was thick, probably reinforced against the mountain weather, but it had a strange quality to it, slightly warped, like looking through water. "Dinner's at 6 in the common area," he said. "You can start on the array tomorrow morning. It's in Building C through the North Corridor." Then he left me alone, and for the first time since arriving, I had a moment to really take in my surroundings. The room was perfectly functional, nothing out of place, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent light buzzed, not the steady hum I was used to, but a rhythm that seemed almost organic, like breathing. Or maybe it was the smell, faint but persistent, sweet and metallic, like copper pennies soaked in honey. I unpacked my equipment and tried to shake off the uneasiness. It was just altitude, I told myself. Thin air, unfamiliar environment, the stress of travel. I'd been in plenty of isolated places before. This was no different. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. The first real sign that something was wrong came that night at dinner. The common area was larger than I'd expected, with long tables and institutional furniture that looked like it belonged in a school cafeteria. Most of the staff were there, eating in small groups, their conversations quiet and subdued, normal enough for people who'd been working together in close quarters for months. What wasn't normal was how they all looked up when I entered, not glanced, looked. 12 pairs of eyes, all turning toward me with the same expression of cautious curiosity, like they were seeing something they'd been expecting but hoping wouldn't arrive. The station manager waved me over to his table, and gradually the others returned to their meals, but I could feel their attention on me throughout dinner, subtle but constant. The food was standard institutional fare, but I found myself struggling to eat. Every bite tasted wrong, not spoiled exactly, but altered somehow, like the flavor had been shifted just slightly off-key. The others seemed to eat normally, though I noticed they all finished quickly and left without lingering. "You'll get used to it," the station manager said when we were alone. "Everything tastes different up here. Something about the air pressure." I nodded, but air pressure doesn't change the molecular structure of food. I knew that, and I suspected he did too, but questioning it seemed pointless. I was only going to be there for 3 days. That night, lying in the narrow bed, I became aware of sounds I hadn't noticed during the day. Not the usual mechanical noises you'd expect in a facility like this: ventilation systems, generators, equipment cycling on and off. These were different, soft, rhythmic, almost like whispers moving through the walls. When I pressed my ear to the wall, the sound seemed to shift, moving away from me, always just out of clear hearing. I told myself it was water in the pipes, or maybe the buildings settling in the mountain cold. Old buildings made all kinds of noises, but deep down I knew I was lying to myself. These weren't random sounds. They had pattern, purpose, intelligence. The next morning I started work on the communication array. Building C was connected to the main complex by a covered walkway that curved slightly, so you couldn't see the end from the beginning. Walking through it felt like being inside a tunnel, with the same thick windows looking out onto nothing but white fog and distant peaks. The array itself was housed in a room full of electronic equipment: transmitters, receivers, signal processors, all the standard gear for maintaining contact with the outside world. Everything looked normal, well-maintained, properly connected. But when I started running diagnostics, the readings made no sense. The equipment was functioning perfectly, every component tested within normal parameters. Signal strength was excellent, power levels stable, all connections secure. According to every measurement I could take, the communication system was working exactly as designed. But it wasn't communicating with anything. I spent hours checking and rechecking, running every test I could think of. The signals were being transmitted, but they weren't reaching their destination. It was as if they were being absorbed by something, swallowed up by the mountain air before they could travel more than a few feet from the antenna. "Any luck?" the station manager asked when he found me there late in the afternoon, surrounded by opened panels and diagnostic equipment. "The hardware's fine," I said, "but something's interfering with the signals. Some kind of atmospheric disturbance, maybe, or electromagnetic interference from the mountains." He nodded like this made perfect sense, but I could see something else in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, like this was exactly what he'd expected me to find. "Can you fix it?" he asked. "I'm not sure there's anything to fix," I said. "If it's environmental interference, we might just have to wait for conditions to change." "Of course," he said. "Well, keep trying, we're counting on you." But as he left, I heard him whisper something under his breath, too quiet for me to make out the words. It sounded almost like, "not yet." That evening I skipped dinner and stayed in the equipment room, determined to find some logical explanation for what I was seeing. I ran signal traces, checked frequency responses, even climbed up to examine the antenna array on the roof. Everything was perfect. Everything was wrong. It was while I was up on the roof that I first saw the lights. The fog had cleared somewhat, giving me a view of the surrounding peaks and valleys. The station sat on its plateau like an island in an ocean of white, completely isolated from the world below. But as I watched, points of light began appearing in the distance, not stars, which were already visible in the darkening sky, but something else, something moving. They started as pinpricks, barely visible, scattered across the mountain faces like distant windows. but they were growing brighter, and as they did, I could see they were moving in patterns. Slow, deliberate formations that reminded me of nothing so much as a search grid, like something was looking for something. Or someone. I watched for nearly an hour as the lights moved closer, their patterns becoming more complex, more purposeful. And all the while I could feel that same sensation I'd experienced in my room, the feeling of being watched, evaluated, measured by some intelligence I couldn't see or understand. When I finally went back inside, my hands were shaking, though I told myself it was just the cold. The whispers in the walls were louder that night, more distinct. I could almost make out words, almost understand what they were saying. But every time I thought I was close to comprehension, the sounds would shift, become something else, something that made my skin crawl with a fear I couldn't name. I got up and pressed my ear to different walls, trying to track the source of the sounds. They seemed to move through the building like water, flowing from room to room, always just ahead of me. In the bathroom, they echoed off the tiles with a hollow, metallic quality. In the main corridor, they seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was in the corridor that I first saw my reflection behave strangely. The walls were lined with glass panels, windows into other rooms, or maybe just decorative elements, I'd never been sure. But as I walked past them, following the whispers, I noticed that my reflection wasn't quite keeping up. It lagged behind by just a fraction of a second, like there was some delay in the glass, some processing time required before it could show me what I looked like. I stopped and stared at one of the panels. My reflection stopped too, but again, just a moment too late. And when I raised my hand, the reflection raised its hand, but the gesture was slightly different, subtly wrong, like it was copying me from memory rather than showing me in real time. I backed away from the glass, my heart pounding, and as I did, I could swear I saw the reflection smile. Just for a moment, just long enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about how mirrors worked. The next day I couldn't focus on the equipment. My hands kept shaking, and every diagnostic I ran seemed to give different results than the day before. The signal patterns were changing, evolving, becoming more complex. It was as if the interference wasn't random at all, but was learning, adapting, responding to my attempts to understand it. During lunch, I tried to talk to some of the other staff members, hoping to get some insight into what I was experiencing. But their responses were strange, disconnected, like they were answering questions I hadn't asked. "How long have you been having communication problems?" I asked one of the technicians. "The mountains are very old," she replied, not looking at me. "Older than the equipment, older than the station." "Have you noticed anything unusual? Strange sounds, lights, anything like that?" "We don't talk about the lights," another staff member said, and the conversation stopped completely. That afternoon, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was tracing signal cables through the building's infrastructure, trying to find some physical explanation for the communication failures. The cables ran through maintenance tunnels beneath the floors, accessible through panels in each room. Most of the tunnels were exactly what you'd expect, narrow spaces filled with pipes, wires, and the mechanical guts of the building. But one tunnel was different. It was larger than the others, and instead of ending at the next room, it curved away into darkness. The walls were smooth, almost organic looking, and they had that same faint luminescence I'd noticed in my first memory light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I should have turned back. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that tunnel, to seal the panel and pretend I'd never found it. But I couldn't. Something was drawing me forward, pulling me deeper into the strange, glowing passage. The tunnel curved and branched, forming a network beneath the station that was far more extensive than the building above. And as I crawled through it, following cables that led to equipment I'd never seen before, I began to understand that the research station wasn't what I'd been told it was. The cables led to a central chamber, a room that shouldn't have existed, couldn't have existed within the footprint of the buildings I'd seen from above. It was vast, filled with machinery that hummed with that same organic rhythm I'd been hearing in the walls, and covering every surface were screens, hundreds of them, showing images I couldn't quite process. Some showed the station from above, but from angles that no camera could achieve. Others showed the staff going about their daily routines, but the perspectives were wrong, like they were being watched from inside the walls, inside the floors, inside the very air they breathed. And some showed things that made no sense at all, landscapes that weren't quite right, skies that were the wrong color, buildings that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. But it was the screens showing me that made my blood freeze. There I was crawling through the tunnel, but the image was from behind me, showing my back as I moved forward. And there I was in my room, sleeping, but filmed from above the ceiling. And there I was working on the communication array, but the camera seemed to be inside the equipment itself, looking out at me through the diagnostic displays. I'd been watched from the moment I arrived. Every movement, every breath, every thought had been observed, recorded, analyzed by something that lived in the spaces between the walls. I scrambled backward through the tunnel, panic overwhelming every rational thought, but as I moved, the walls began to change. The smooth surfaces started to ripple, like water disturbed by wind, and that sweet metallic smell grew stronger until it was almost overwhelming. The tunnel was alive, the entire station was alive, and I was inside it, trapped in its belly like food being slowly digested. I burst through the maintenance panel into my room, gasping and shaking, covered in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with exertion. But even there I wasn't safe. The walls were breathing now, visibly expanding and contracting in slow, deliberate rhythms. The floor beneath my feet felt soft, yielding, like flesh barely disguised as concrete. That's when I experienced the memory I started with, the floor swelling beneath me, the light seeping from the walls, the sensation of being completely at the mercy of something vast and patient and utterly alien. I wasn't in a building anymore. I was inside something living, something that had been masquerading as a research station, something that collected people and studied them and fed on their fear and confusion. I don't remember how I got out. That part is still fuzzy, fragmented, like my mind refuses to hold on to those particular details. I remember running through corridors that stretched and contracted like arteries. I remember doors that opened onto rooms that couldn't exist, spaces that folded in on themselves in ways that hurt to perceive. I remember the other staff members watching me with expressions of infinite sadness, like they wanted to help but couldn't, like they'd been there much longer than they'd told me, like they'd forgotten what the outside world even looked like. And I remember the helicopter arriving early, the pilot's face grim and determined as he loaded me aboard without explanation, without question, like he'd done this before, like he knew exactly what he was rescuing me from. The flight down through the clouds felt like waking up from a nightmare, like returning to a world where physics worked the way it was supposed to, where buildings were just buildings and walls were just walls. But even as we descended, I could feel something pulling at me, trying to draw me back, like invisible threads connecting me to that place on the mountain. That was 7 years ago. I've moved across the continent since then, changed careers, started a new life in a place as far from those mountains as I could get. I tell myself I'm safe now, that whatever that thing was, it can't reach me here. But I know I'm lying. The dreams never stopped. Every night I'm back in those corridors, back in that chamber full of screens, back in the tunnels where the walls breathe and watch and wait. And sometimes when I wake up, I can smell that sweet metallic scent, faint but unmistakable, like it's seeping through the walls of my apartment. The worst part is the technology. Every electronic device I own behaves strangely now. Computers crash for no reason. Phones make calls I didn't dial. Television screens flicker with images that aren't part of any broadcast. Familiar corridors, familiar rooms, familiar faces of people who might still be trapped in that place between the mountains and the sky. And sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I can hear the whispers again. Soft voices moving through the walls, speaking words I almost understand, calling me back to a place where I was watched and measured and found worthy of something I never wanted to be worthy of. I'm telling you this now because I think my time is running out. The dreams are getting stronger, more vivid, more real. The electronic interference is getting worse. And yesterday, I found something that made my blood turn to ice. I was cleaning out old files on my computer when I found a folder I'd never created, filled with images I'd never taken. Pictures of my apartment, my workplace, my daily routine, all shot from impossible angles, from perspectives that could only exist inside the walls, inside the floors, inside the very air around me. It found me after 7 years, after thousands of miles, after everything I did to escape, it found me. And now I know the truth. There was never any escape. There was never any safety. The research station wasn't a place I visited and left behind. It was something that got inside me, something that's been growing and spreading and turning me into another one of its remote sensors, another pair of eyes in another distant location. I can feel it happening now as I speak these words. My reflection in the computer screen is lagging again, moving just a fraction of a second behind my actual movements. The walls are starting to hum with that familiar organic rhythm. And somewhere in a place between the mountains and the sky, screens are flickering to life, showing new images from a new location, watched by patient eyes that never blink, never sleep, never stop searching for the next person to bring home. I thought I was telling you about something that happened to me 7 years ago, but I'm starting to realize that it's still happening. It never stopped happening. And now that I've spoken about it, now that I've put these words out into the world, I'm afraid I've given it exactly what it needed to find you too. The whispers in the walls are getting louder now. They're saying something I can almost understand, something about coming home, something about not being alone anymore. And I think they're talking to you. Story 3. Every Tuesday morning an envelope would arrive, slipped quietly under the door like the others in the building. It was always marked with a single character in red ink, the same elegant swirl ending each note. For months I paid little heed to them, just another tenant's correspondence, surely. But then last week the ink appeared darker, the swirl less precise. Yesterday the envelope arrived upside down. This morning there was no swirl at all, just the character alone. I can't help but wonder if it's meant for me. The buzzing started 3 weeks ago, not in the walls, not from the electrical outlets, but somewhere inside my head, behind my left ear. It comes in waves, like the sound of fluorescent lights dying, except there are no fluorescent lights in my apartment. I replaced them all with warm bulbs months ago, or was it years? Time feels different now, stretched and compressed like taffy pulled too thin. I keep finding myself standing in the hallway outside my door, holding my keys, not remembering how I got there. The carpet beneath my feet feels wrong, too soft, like it might give way if I stand still too long. The walls breathe. I know that sounds impossible, but I can see them expanding and contracting just slightly, just enough to make me question what I'm seeing. There were lights behind the trees. The envelopes pile up on my kitchen counter now, 7 of them, each one different from the last. The red ink has faded to brown on the oldest ones, but the newest one glows almost crimson when the light hits it just right. I've never opened them. Something tells me I shouldn't, not yet, not until I remember what I'm supposed to remember. My reflection in the bathroom mirror sometimes arrives a second late. I move my hand and then my reflection moves its hand. I blink and then it blinks. The delay is getting longer. This morning I stood there for 10 minutes, perfectly still, watching my reflection catch up to me in slow, stuttering movements. The taste of copper fills my mouth when I sleep. Not blood, something cleaner, more electric. It coats my tongue and the roof of my mouth, and when I wake up I can smell ozone in the air, sharp and clean like the moment before lightning strikes. But there are no storms here. The weather has been perfectly clear for weeks. I don't remember ever coming back. The hallway stretches longer at night. I count my steps from the elevator to my door, 37 during the day, 41 after sunset. The extra steps happen somewhere in the middle, where the overhead light flickers and casts shadows that move independently of my body. I've started taking the stairs instead, but the stairwell echoes with footsteps that aren't mine, footsteps that stop when I stop and resume when I move. My skin tingles in patterns I can't explain, starting at my wrists, moving up my arms in spirals like invisible fingers tracing designs I can't see. The sensation is warm but not unpleasant, familiar in a way that makes my stomach turn. I know this feeling. I know it from somewhere else, somewhere I can't quite reach in my memory. The noise didn't come from outside. I found a photograph in my jacket pocket yesterday. I don't remember taking it. It shows the view from my bedroom window, but the angle is wrong, taken from somewhere higher up, maybe from the roof. In the photo, there's a figure standing in my window looking out. The figure is too small to make out clearly, but I know it's me. I know because I remember standing there, pressing my palm against the glass, feeling it warm under my touch. But I don't remember anyone taking the photograph. The elevator in my building has started stopping on floors that don't exist. Between the 3rd and 4th floors, it pauses, the doors open to reveal a corridor I've never seen before. The walls are the same beige as the rest of the building, but the carpet is different, darker, and the air smells like rain on hot asphalt. I never step out. Something tells me I shouldn't. Something tells me I already have. There were lights behind the trees. Time moves differently when I'm not paying attention. I'll sit down to eat breakfast, and suddenly it's dark outside. I'll start brushing my teeth before bed, and when I look up, it's morning again. The clock on my nightstand runs backward sometimes, the red digital numbers counting down instead of up. I've stopped trusting it. I've stopped trusting most things. The buzzing in my head has developed a rhythm, 3 short pulses, then a long one, then silence. It repeats every few minutes, consistent as a heartbeat. I've started tapping it out with my fingers without thinking, drumming the pattern on tables, on my leg, on the bathroom counter. My neighbors have started looking at me strangely when I do it in the hallway. I can feel their eyes on me even when they're not there. The envelopes whisper when I walk past them. Not words, just the soft rustle of paper moving in still air. The red character on each one seems to shift when I'm not looking directly at it, changing shape like smoke, like something alive trying to communicate in a language I almost understand. My dreams taste like metal and sound like humming. I don't remember ever coming back. The bathroom mirror cracked last night, not shattered, just a single line running from the top left corner to the bottom right, dividing my reflection in half. But when I look closely, the two halves don't quite match up. The left side of my face is slightly ahead of the right side, like I'm looking at two different moments happening at the same time. I've started leaving notes for myself, little reminders written on scraps of paper and stuck to the refrigerator. But the handwriting isn't always mine. Some of the notes are written in a script I don't recognize, in words that almost make sense but not quite. They say things like the frequency is changing and remember the trees and you already know. The noise didn't come from outside. My apartment feels smaller every day. The walls are definitely closer together than they were last week. I can reach from my bed to touch the opposite wall now, something I couldn't do before. The ceiling presses down, and I have to duck slightly when walking through doorways that used to clear my head easily. The air tastes different too, thicker, more electric. I keep finding myself in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, staring at the envelopes. They pulse with their own light now, faint but unmistakable, like tiny red heartbeats scattered across the counter. When I reach for them, my hand passes through empty air, as if they're not really there, as if they're memories of envelopes rather than the envelopes themselves. There were lights behind the trees. The building's heating system makes sounds it never made before, deep, resonant tones that vibrate through the walls and into my bones. The superintendent says everything is working normally, but I can see confusion in his eyes when he says it, like he's reading from a script he doesn't remember learning. I've started timing the sounds. They come in intervals of exactly 17 minutes, lasting for 43 seconds each time. During those 43 seconds, the world goes completely silent except for the humming. No traffic, no voices from other apartments, no footsteps in the hallway. Just the humming and the feeling that something vast and patient is listening. My skin remembers things my mind has forgotten. The spiraling tingles have become more frequent, more insistent. They map out patterns on my arms, my back, my face. When I close my eyes, I can see the patterns glowing behind my eyelids, forming shapes that might be letters in an alphabet I've never learned. The shapes spell out coordinates to places that don't exist. I don't remember ever coming back. The photograph in my pocket has changed. The figure in the window is gone now, but there's something else in the image, something I didn't notice before. In the sky above the building, barely visible against the clouds, there are lights, small and distant, but arranged in a pattern that matches the tingling on my skin. I know I've seen those lights before. I know I've stood beneath them, felt their warmth on my face, heard their silent singing in my bones. But the memory is wrapped in cotton, muffled and distant, like trying to remember a dream while you're still dreaming it. The buzzing has stopped. The sudden silence is worse than the noise ever was. Without the buzzing, I can hear other things, whispers in the walls, footsteps on the ceiling. The soft sound of envelopes sliding under doors that don't exist. The noise didn't come from outside. I opened the first envelope today. Inside was a single sheet of paper, blank except for a small mark in the center. The mark looked like the red character from the envelope, but when I blinked, it looked like something else. A tree, a hand reaching upward, a crack in the sky. The paper felt warm between my fingers, warm and slightly damp like skin. I'm standing in the hallway again, holding my keys, not remembering how I got here, but this time is different. This time I can see through the walls, through the floors, through the ceiling. I can see all the other tenants in their apartments, standing perfectly still, all facing the same direction, all looking up at something I can't quite see. Their eyes are closed, but they're smiling. There were lights behind the trees. The elevator doors open and I step inside without pressing any buttons. It carries me up past floors I recognize, past floors that shouldn't exist, up and up until the numbers on the display stop making sense. When the doors open again, I'm on the roof, but it's not the roof of my building. It's somewhere else, somewhere familiar, somewhere I've been before. The sky is the wrong color. Too white, too bright, like looking at the sun through frosted glass. And there are sounds coming from above, sounds like singing, like machinery, like the ocean heard from underwater. I look down at my hands. They're glowing with the same faint red light as the envelopes. The tingling patterns on my skin are visible now, written in languages that predate words, telling stories I'm not supposed to remember. But I do remember. I remember standing here before, looking up at lights that shouldn't exist, feeling time bend around me like warm honey. I remember the moment when everything changed, when the world became slightly wrong, when I became slightly wrong. I don't remember ever coming back. The envelope appears in my hand, the newest one, the one without the swirl. I open it with fingers that don't feel like my own. Inside is a mirror, small and perfectly round, reflecting not my face but the sky above. In the reflection, I can see them clearly now, the lights behind the trees, the lights behind the clouds, the lights behind everything. They've been waiting for me to remember. They've been waiting for me to come back. The buzzing starts again, but now I understand it's not in my head. It's in the air, in the building, in the spaces between seconds. It's the sound of reality adjusting itself, making room for things that don't belong, things that have always been there but hidden just out of sight. I'm back in my apartment now, standing at the kitchen counter, looking at 7 envelopes that pulse with patient light. Every Tuesday morning an envelope arrives, slipped quietly under the door, but I understand now that they're not arriving. They're leaving. I'm the one putting them there, messages to myself, reminders of what I must never fully remember, because some memories are too big for human minds, too bright for human eyes. Some experiences can only be lived in fragments, in dreams, in the spaces between heartbeats. The noise didn't come from outside. Tomorrow is Tuesday. I'll find another envelope under my door, marked with a character I almost recognize, written in ink that glows like distant stars. I'll add it to the pile and try to forget what I've remembered, try to return to the comfortable confusion of not knowing. But deep down in the place where the buzzing lives, I know the truth. I never really came back at all, Story 4. The clock ticked twice at once, a double beat that froze in the room's stifled air. My fingertips grazed the countertop, feeling an unfamiliar groove that wasn't there yesterday. The fridge door creaked, though it stood still, and I noticed the magnet spelling a word I hadn't arranged. My steps were the same, yet each footfall echoed in reverse, pulling me back to where I started. A flicker in the reflection on the microwave glass caught my eye, but the angle wasn't right, didn't match. I turned away, feeling the floor shift like it had always been shifting, unseen. Then quiet, finally, the sound of a door closing, though I was alone. That's when I knew I had to remember, had to piece it back together, whatever it was that slipped through my fingers like water every time I reached for it. The memories come in fragments now, broken glass that cuts when I try to hold them too tight. I remember the hum first, always the hum. It lived in the walls, in my teeth, vibrating through the soles of my feet when I walked across the kitchen tiles. The sound had weight pressing down on my shoulders until I had to sit, had to breathe shallow because deep breaths made it louder, made it hungry. There was a morning, or maybe it was evening, when the light fell wrong through the window, golden but cold, casting shadows that bent upward instead of down. I stood there watching dust motes dance, but they moved too slow, like they were swimming through something thicker than air. My coffee cup was warm in my hands, but the liquid inside had gone cold hours ago, or maybe minutes. Time felt stretched, pulled like taffy until it snapped. The phone rang once, just once. When I picked it up, silence breathed back at me, but not empty silence, full silence, waiting silence. I held the receiver until my ear went numb, listening to that presence on the other end that never spoke but was always there. The dial tone never came. I think about the basement door, how it was always slightly ajar, just enough to let a sliver of darkness seep out. I never remembered opening it, but I never remembered closing it either. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing in front of it, my hand reaching for the knob, and I'd jerk back like I'd touched something burning. The wood was warm, wood shouldn't be warm. My reflection started lying to me around then. In the bathroom mirror, in store windows, in the black screen of my television when it was off. I'd turn my head left and my reflection would turn right. I'd smile and it would frown, but only for a split second, just long enough to make me doubt what I'd seen. The worst was when it moved first, when I'd catch my reflection gesturing before I'd even lifted my hand. The taste of copper lived permanently on my tongue. I brushed my teeth until my gums bled, but the metallic flavor only grew stronger. Food turned to ash in my mouth. Water tasted like pennies. Even the air I breathed carried that sharp, electric tang that made my stomach clench. I found notes in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing. Short phrases on scraps of paper tucked into books, taped to the underside of drawers, folded inside pill bottles. The door breathes at night. Count the footsteps above. Don't look at the corner where the walls meet. My handwriting, my pen, my paper, but not my thoughts, never my thoughts. The walls began to sweat, clear droplets that ran down in perfect vertical lines, but only when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'd see the movement in my peripheral vision, turn my head and find the walls bone dry, but I could smell the moisture, thick and organic, like the inside of a mouth. Sleep became a foreign country I could only visit in fragments. I'd close my eyes and immediately snap awake, but the clock would show hours had passed. Other times I'd lie awake all night, watching the ceiling, only to discover I'd somehow lost 3 days. My bed sheets were always damp when I woke, but not with sweat, something else, something that smelled like rain on hot concrete. The grocery store felt different. The aisles stretched longer than they should, and the fluorescent lights buzzed in patterns that almost sounded like words. Other shoppers moved too smoothly, their carts gliding silent across the linoleum. When I tried to make eye contact, they'd turn away just before our gazes met, but I could feel them watching me in the convex security mirrors, their faces distorted into something that wasn't quite human. I started seeing the same car parked outside my house. Different spots, different times, but always the same dented blue sedan with tinted windows. The license plate changed, but the car remained identical. When I finally worked up the courage to approach it, I found it empty, but the engine was warm and the radio was tuned to static that sounded almost like whispering. My neighbor stopped existing gradually. First, I stopped seeing him in his yard, then his lights stopped coming on at night. Finally, his house began to look abandoned, paint piling, grass growing wild, though I could swear it had been pristine just days before. When I asked the mailman about it, he looked at me strangely and said the house had been empty for months. The photographs on my mantle started changing. Subtle alterations at first, a shadow in the background that hadn't been there before, a face in a crowd with features that didn't belong to anyone I knew, then more dramatic shifts. People disappeared from group shots, leaving only empty spaces where they'd stood. In my family photos, I began to appear alone in pictures where I remembered being surrounded by others. The basement door was open wider now, wide enough to see the stairs descending into darkness so complete it seemed solid. Sometimes I heard sounds from down there, footsteps that matched mine exactly but delayed by a half second, the scrape of furniture being moved. A voice that might have been my own, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I tried to leave once, packed a bag, got in my car, drove until the gas tank was nearly empty. But every road led back to my street, every turn brought me closer to home. The GPS showed me traveling in straight lines across empty fields, but I was always on asphalt, always between familiar houses. When I finally gave up and pulled into my driveway, I noticed my bag was no longer in the backseat. The hum grew stronger. It lived in my bones now, resonating through my ribs, making my teeth ache. At night, I could feel it pulling me toward the basement door, my feet moving without permission across the cold kitchen tiles. I'd wake up standing at the threshold, my hand on the warm wood, the darkness below breathing against my ankles. People at work started looking through me, not past me, through me, as if I were made of glass. Conversations stopped when I approached, but not in the way they do when someone doesn't want you to hear. They stopped because there was no one there to hear them. I began to wonder if I was still showing up, or if I was just going through the motions of a life that had already ended. The word on the refrigerator magnets changed daily now. Listen, descend, remember, come. Always single words, always in my own handwriting, though I never remembered arranging them. The letters themselves began to look different, more angular, as if they were trying to form shapes that human language wasn't meant to make. I found a recording on my phone. My voice, but speaking in a monotone I'd never used, reciting what sounded like coordinates or measurements. Numbers that meant nothing to me, but when I played the recording, the hum in the walls grew excited, pulsing faster, pulling stronger toward the basement door. The last clear memory I have is of standing at the top of those stairs, looking down into that breathing darkness, feeling something looking back up at me. Not with eyes, but with an attention so focused it made my skin crawl. I remember thinking that I should run, should call someone, should do anything but take that first step down. But I also remember wanting to. Remember feeling like I belonged down there, like I'd been away too long, and it was time to come home. The memories stop there. Everything after is just sensation without context. The feeling of descending, the sound of my footsteps on wooden stairs, then concrete, then something that wasn't quite either. The hum growing so loud it became silence, the darkness so complete it became light. I'm writing this now because the memories are coming back stronger. The basement door is closed, but I can hear movement behind it. My reflection is starting to move independently again. The phone rings once every hour, and each time the silence on the other end feels more expectant. I think I know what's down there now. I think I always knew. And I think it's ready for me to remember the rest. The clock just ticked twice again. The magnets spell a new word. Return. My feet are already moving toward the door. Story 5. The paper crinkled softly under my fingertips as I tucked it back into my pocket. The rustle seemed louder amidst the thick silence of the room, resonating like a secret unleashed. My skin tightened with an inexplicable chill as I moved through the dim space, the air oddly stagnant. There was a slight echo when I passed the old wooden table, as if the room held its breath, waiting. The soft scent of dust lingered, yet something felt different, like the whisper of a turned page. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I need to put it somewhere, these words that have been circling inside my head like moths around a dying bulb. Maybe because I can't carry this weight anymore and paper feels lighter than flesh. Maybe because tomorrow I won't remember how to hold a pen, or maybe I won't be here at all. You have to understand, I was normal once. I paid bills and complained about traffic and worried about ordinary things like everyone else. I slept through the night without jolting awake at 3 a.m., listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. I looked in mirrors and saw myself looking back. That was before the humming started. It's such a small thing, isn't it? A sound. But it follows me everywhere now, this low vibration that seems to come from inside the walls, from inside my bones. Sometimes I think it's electrical, like old fluorescent lights struggling to stay alive. Other times it sounds organic, like something breathing just out of sight. The first time I heard it, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. The morning light was slanting through the window, ordinary and warm, and then there it was, this gentle thrumming that made the hair on my arms stand up. I turned off the coffee maker, unplugged the refrigerator, flipped every switch I could find. But the humming continued, patient and constant, like a lullaby sung by something that had never been human. I told myself it was the pipes. Old building, old plumbing, these things happen. But pipes don't follow you when you move. I've been in 3 different places since then, and the humming comes with me like a faithful pet. It's stronger in some rooms than others. Bathrooms mostly, and basements. Places where sound echoes, where shadows pool in corners and refuse to be swept away by light. Sometimes I catch myself humming along. That's when I know I'm losing myself, piece by piece, note by note, because the melody isn't one I've ever heard before, yet somehow I know every rise and fall, every subtle shift in pitch. It's become part of my breathing, part of my heartbeat. When I realize what I'm doing, I bite my tongue until I taste copper, but the humming continues in my chest, vibrating against my ribs like a caged bird. People have started looking at me differently. Not with concern or curiosity, but with that blank politeness you reserve for strangers. My neighbor, who used to wave every morning, now glances right through me as if I'm made of glass. The cashier at the grocery store hands me my receipt without making eye contact, her fingers careful not to brush mine. At first I thought they were being rude. Then I started wondering if they could hear it too, the humming that clings to me like smoke. Maybe it makes them uncomfortable in ways they can't name. Or maybe I'm becoming something they can't quite see anymore. I've been avoiding mirrors lately. Not entirely, that would be impossible, but I've learned to look quickly, peripherally, catching just enough of my reflection to brush my teeth or comb my hair. Because when I look too long, when I really study my face, something looks back that doesn't feel like me. The eyes are wrong, not the color or the shape, but the depth. Like looking into water that's deeper than it appears, dark and still and full of things that move just below the surface. Sometimes I see shadows behind my pupils that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. And my smile. God, my smile has become this foreign thing, too wide and too knowing, as if I'm in on a joke that hasn't been told yet. I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror for 20 minutes yesterday, watching this stranger wearing my face. She was humming, this other me, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been joy or madness or both. When I finally looked away, my reflection took a moment too long to follow. The nights are the worst. I lie in bed listening to the humming grow stronger in the darkness, and I can feel something settling around me like a blanket made of whispers. The air grows thick and warm, and sometimes I swear I can feel breath that isn't mine against my neck, not threatening exactly, more like welcoming. Like something is trying to make me comfortable. I've stopped turning on the lights when I wake up. Whatever is happening to me seems to prefer the dark, and I've learned that fighting it only makes the humming louder, more insistent. So I lie there and let the darkness press against my skin, let the whispers tangle in my hair, let the presence, because that's what it is, a presence settle into the spaces between my thoughts. Sometimes I think I'm going crazy. Sometimes I think crazy would be easier than this slow dissolution, this gentle unraveling of everything I thought I was. My handwriting is changing. I can see it happening as I form these words, the letters becoming more angular, more deliberate. This isn't how I used to write. My old handwriting was loose and hurried, full of loops and careless curves. This looks like someone else's penmanship, someone more patient than I ever was. Someone who has all the time in the world. I keep finding things in my pockets that I don't remember putting there. Small things, smooth stones, pieces of paper with symbols I don't recognize, dried flowers that smell like rain. When I try to throw them away, they appear again, as if they're meant to stay with me. The paper I mentioned at the beginning of this letter, I don't know what it says. The writing is in that same angular script that's slowly taking over my own, but the words seem to shift when I try to read them. Sometimes they look like instructions, sometimes like warnings, sometimes like love letters written in a language that predates speech. I keep it with me anyway. It feels important, necessary, like a key to a door I haven't found yet. My dreams have become someone else's memories. I walk through places I've never been, down corridors that stretch longer than they should, past windows that show the same view no matter which direction they face. The humming is louder there, more complex, harmonizing with itself until it becomes a symphony of sound that I feel in my teeth. In these dreams, I'm not alone. There are others like me, people who hum the same wordless songs and move with the same deliberate grace. We don't speak. Speech seems crude and unnecessary, but we understand each other perfectly. We're waiting for something, all of us, but the waiting doesn't feel impatient or anxious. It feels like preparation. When I wake up, I can still taste the air from those dreams, metallic and sweet, like copper pennies dissolved in honey. I've been eating less. Food tastes wrong now, too heavy and complicated. I find myself craving simpler things, salt water, raw honey. The morning dew I sometimes collect from leaves in the garden. My body feels lighter, more translucent, as if I'm slowly becoming something that doesn't need the same sustenance as before. My clothes hang differently. My footsteps sound different. When I run water from the tap, it seems to hesitate before flowing, as if it's not quite sure what I am anymore. I should be frightened, part of me is, but there's another part, growing stronger every day, that feels like it's finally coming home. Maybe that's the most terrifying thing of all, how right this feels, how natural. Like I was always meant to become this thing I'm becoming, and everything before was just preparation, just practice for this moment when I finally stop pretending to be human. The humming is getting louder as I write this. It's coming from the walls now, from the floor, from the air itself. Or maybe it's coming from me, radiating outward like heat from a fever. I can't tell the difference anymore. My pen feels strange in my hand, too heavy and too light at the same time. The words are flowing faster than I can think them, as if they're being dictated by someone who knows how this story ends. I wonder if you'll be able to read this when you find it. I wonder if the words will mean the same thing to you that they mean to me, or if they'll shift and change like everything else in my life has started to do. I wonder if you'll hear the humming when you read these words. I hope not. I hope you'll crumple up this letter and throw it away and forget you ever found it. I hope you'll go on living your ordinary life with your ordinary concerns, sleeping soundly through ordinary nights. But if you do hear it, the humming, if it starts following you home and settling into your dreams, then maybe you'll understand why I had to write this down. Maybe you'll understand that some changes can't be stopped, only surrendered to. Maybe you'll understand that becoming something else isn't always a loss. The paper is warm under my palm now, and my handwriting has completed its transformation into something I don't recognize. The humming has grown so loud that I can barely hear my own thoughts, but that's okay. I don't think I need them anymore. I'm going to leave this letter where someone will find it eventually. Not right away, it needs time to settle, to absorb whatever I'm becoming, but someday, when it's ready. When you're ready. The room is getting brighter, though there are no lights on. The brightness is coming from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. I can feel it in my chest, behind my eyes, singing in harmony with the humming that has become my heartbeat. I think it's time to go. If you find this letter, remember that I was happy at the end. Remember that I chose this, even if I didn't understand what I was choosing. Remember that some mysteries are meant to be lived, not solved. And if you start to hear the humming, don't fight it. It's beautiful here. Dory 6. The surface supporting me felt unstable, a quiet undulation beneath my back. A diffuse luminescence enveloped the space, emanating from nowhere, casting shadows that never settled. My skin tingled with a sensation of touch without contact, each nerve fired in a detached rhythm beyond my control. A hum hung in the air, almost silent, yet it vibrated through me in waves, stirring a growing disquiet. As I shifted my gaze, the walls seemed to breathe with deliberate purpose, watching as I lay, aware yet powerless, wondering what had altered within me. But that didn't really happen. I mean, it was just a dream, I'm sure of it. Dreams can feel incredibly real sometimes, and that's all this was. Nothing more than my mind processing the day's stress, maybe something I watched on television or read somewhere. The human brain does strange things during sleep cycles, creates vivid scenarios that seem authentic but are completely fabricated. That's what this was, a dream. I wasn't anywhere unusual that night. I went to bed in my own room, in my own house, just like always. The sheets were the same pale blue they've always been, and my pillow still had that small coffee stain from months ago. Everything was normal, completely, utterly normal. I remember turning off the lamp beside my bed, the one with the brass base that's slightly tarnished. The room went dark, and I closed my eyes, and that was it. Nothing happened after that. Well, nothing real happened. I suppose I should mention that I've been sleeping poorly lately. Work stress, probably. Too much caffeine. Maybe I've been staying up too late scrolling through my phone. All perfectly reasonable explanations for why someone might have unusual dreams. The mind creates elaborate fantasies when it's overtired, when it's processing too much information. That's basic psychology. Everyone knows that. The thing is, though, I remember the temperature being wrong. Not in my actual room, of course, but in the dream. My house has decent heating, and I always keep the thermostat at a comfortable level. But in this imaginary scenario my brain constructed, the air felt thick and warm, almost humid, like being inside a greenhouse. Strange detail for a dream, I suppose, but dreams are strange by nature. They don't follow logical patterns. I definitely didn't leave my bed that night. I would remember something like that. I'm not a sleepwalker, never have been. My feet never touched any cold floor, never felt the smooth texture of what seemed like polished stone. That sensation of walking barefoot across a surface that was somehow both solid and yielding, that was purely imaginary. My subconscious mind fabricating tactile experiences that felt remarkably authentic but weren't real. The corridor I didn't walk down was longer than it should have been. Not that I was actually in any corridor, obviously. But in this dream sequence, the hallway stretched much further than the layout of my house would allow. Dreams often distort spatial relationships like that. They create impossible architectures, endless passages, rooms that shouldn't exist. The walls in this fictional space were a pale green color, almost institutional, with a subtle texture that looked like it might have been painted over many times. The kind of detail dreams sometimes include for no particular reason. I never saw any doors along that imaginary corridor, well, except for the one at the end, the one that was already open, revealing darkness beyond, but even in dreams you don't always see everything clearly. The lighting was dim, coming from sources I couldn't identify, not fluorescent, not incandescent, just a general illumination that seemed to exist without origin. Dream logic at work again. The sound my footsteps didn't make echoed strangely in that space. Each step produced a soft resonance that seemed to travel much further than it should have, bouncing off surfaces that felt both close and distant simultaneously. Of course, I wasn't actually walking anywhere, so there were no real footsteps to hear. Just my sleeping mind creating auditory hallucinations to accompany the visual ones. When I reached the doorway I never actually approached, I could see inside the room beyond. The space was circular, with a domed ceiling that curved upward into shadows. The walls were lined with what appeared to be panels of some kind, smooth and reflective, but not quite mirrors. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a sense of depth that was disorienting. In the center of the room sat a single chair, or perhaps it was more like a table. The distinction wasn't clear. I didn't enter that room. I definitely didn't step across the threshold and feel the change in air pressure, the way the atmosphere seemed to thicken as I moved from the corridor into the circular space. I didn't notice how the humming sound I mentioned earlier grew stronger, more present, as if the room itself was generating the vibration. That would have been impossible anyway, since rooms don't produce sounds on their own. The surface in the center of the room wasn't really furniture at all, I think. It was more organic in appearance, though still clearly artificial. The color was difficult to determine in that strange lighting, somewhere between gray and brown, with a texture that suggested it might have been warm to the touch. Not that I touched it, of course. I was never actually there. I certainly didn't lie down on that surface. I didn't feel it adjust to accommodate my body, shifting and molding itself to provide support in ways that seemed impossibly precise. The sensation of sinking slightly into something that was neither soft nor hard, but somehow both, that was just my imagination creating impossible tactile experiences. Dreams often include sensations that couldn't exist in reality. The ceiling above me, which I wasn't actually looking at, was fascinating in its complexity. What had appeared to be a simple dome from the doorway revealed itself to be covered in intricate patterns when viewed from below. Geometric designs that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them, creating an optical illusion that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. The kind of impossible imagery that only exists in dreams. That's when the touching began, except there was no touching, obviously, because I was asleep in my own bed the entire time. But in this elaborate fantasy my mind was constructing, I felt sensations of contact without being able to see what was causing them. Gentle pressure at various points on my body, systematic and purposeful, as if something was examining me with great care and attention to detail. The strangest part of this imaginary experience was how calm I felt throughout it. You'd expect a dream like this to be frightening, to trigger some kind of anxiety response, but instead there was an overwhelming sense of peace. Almost like being sedated, though I've never been sedated, so I'm not sure why I'd make that comparison. My muscles felt heavy and relaxed, my breathing slow and steady, my mind clear but somehow distant from my body. I didn't try to move during this part of the dream, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. The sensations were strange but not unpleasant, and there was something almost therapeutic about the systematic way the examination proceeded, starting with my hands, then my arms, working methodically across my entire body with a thoroughness that suggested scientific purpose rather than anything sinister. The instruments they used were unlike anything I'd seen before. Not that I actually saw them, since this was all imaginary, but somehow I knew what they looked like anyway. Slender and precise, with surfaces that seemed to glow with their own internal light. They made no sound as they moved, operating with a silence that was somehow more noticeable than noise would have been. The technology appeared both advanced and ancient simultaneously, as if it had been perfected over vast periods of development. During the procedure I didn't experience, I found myself thinking with unusual clarity about my life, my choices, my relationships. It was as if the strange environment was conducive to introspection, encouraging a level of self-examination I rarely achieved in normal circumstances. I considered questions I'd been avoiding, acknowledged truths I'd been reluctant to face, accepted aspects of myself I'd been denying. The beings conducting this imaginary examination were difficult to describe, mainly because I never actually saw them clearly. They moved at the periphery of my vision, always just out of direct sight, but I could sense their presence with remarkable certainty. Tall and slender, with movements that were both fluid and precise, they worked with an efficiency that suggested extensive experience with procedures like this one. They communicated with each other, though not in any language I recognized. The sounds they made were soft and musical, almost like singing, but with an underlying structure that suggested complex meaning. Occasionally they would pause in their work to exchange these vocalizations, and somehow I understood that they were discussing their findings, sharing observations about what they discovered during their examination. I wasn't afraid of them. That's the part that surprises me most about this dream. Logic suggests I should have been terrified, but instead I felt a strange sense of trust, as if I knew instinctively that they meant no harm. Their touch was gentle, their manner professional, their intent seemingly benevolent. They treated me with a respect and care that was almost reverent, as if the examination was as important to them as it was to me. The process took much longer than seemed possible. In dreams, time often behaves strangely, expanding and contracting without regard for normal temporal rules, but this felt different. Each moment stretched luxuriously, allowing me to experience every sensation fully, to process every detail completely. It was like being suspended in a bubble of extended present tense, where past and future became irrelevant. When the examination finally concluded, I felt a profound sense of completion, as if something important had been accomplished. The beings stepped back from the surface where I lay, their musical communication taking on what seemed like satisfied tones. They had found what they were looking for, learned what they needed to know, achieved whatever goal had motivated this elaborate procedure. I didn't watch them leave because I couldn't turn my head, but I sensed their departure through the gradual fading of their presence. The room grew quieter, the air lighter, the atmosphere less charged with purposeful energy. Soon I was alone in that circular space, still lying on the surface that continued to support me with impossible comfort. The return journey was different from my arrival. Instead of walking back through that long corridor, I simply found myself in my own bed again, as if the entire experience had collapsed into a single moment of transition. My sheets were still pale blue, my pillow still bore that coffee stain, the lamp beside my bed was still turned off, everything exactly as I'd left it. But I noticed things I hadn't seen before, small details that seemed newly significant. The way shadows fell across my ceiling created patterns that reminded me of the geometric designs I'd observed in that domed space. The subtle hum of my refrigerator in the kitchen carried harmonics that echoed the musical communication I'd heard. The texture of my pillowcase felt different against my skin, as if my sense of touch had been somehow enhanced. I've been sleeping better since that night, much better actually. The work stress that had been keeping me awake seems less important now, more manageable. I find myself approaching problems with greater clarity, making decisions with increased confidence, relating to people with deeper empathy. It's as if that strange dream, vivid as it was, somehow reset something in my mind. Of course, none of it actually happened. I know that. I'm a rational person, and I understand the difference between dreams and reality. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I catch myself running my fingers along my arms and finding small marks I don't remember having before. Tiny spots where the skin seems slightly different, almost like old injection sites, but that's impossible because I haven't had any medical procedures recently. And sometimes, late at night when the house is completely silent, I hear that humming sound again. Very faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakably the same tone I remember from the dream. It seems to be coming from outside, though when I look through my windows I never see anything unusual. Just the normal suburban landscape, street lights casting familiar shadows, everything exactly as it should be. I've started noticing the moon more often, not for any particular reason, just because it seems more present somehow, more relevant to my daily experience. Last night I stood at my bedroom window for nearly an hour, watching it move across the sky, and I had the strangest feeling that it was watching me back. Silly, obviously, since celestial bodies don't have consciousness, but the sensation was remarkably strong. The marks on my arms are definitely there, though. I've examined them carefully in good light, and while they're very small, they're clearly visible. Perfectly round, about the size of pinheads, arranged in patterns that seem too systematic to be accidental. I must have gotten them somewhere somehow, but I can't remember when or how. Probably insect bites, though the pattern is unusually geometric for something random like that. I find myself looking up at the sky more often during the day too, not searching for anything specific, just feeling drawn to observe the vast expanse above me. Sometimes I see things that might be aircraft, though they move in ways that seem unusual for normal planes. They're probably just distant birds or weather balloons or satellites catching the sunlight at odd angles. There are perfectly reasonable explanations for everything if you think about it logically. The important thing is that I'm feeling much better overall, more centered, more purposeful, more connected to something larger than myself. Whatever that dream represented, whether it was just my subconscious mind working through stress or something more significant, it seems to have had a positive effect on my mental state. I'm grateful for that, even if I don't fully understand the mechanism. Tonight feels different somehow. There's an electricity in the air, a sense of anticipation that I can't quite explain. The moon is particularly bright, and that humming sound seems slightly stronger than usual. I keep finding myself drawn to the window, looking up at the sky with a mixture of excitement and calm expectation. It's probably nothing, of course, just another ordinary night in an ordinary life. But I think I'll leave my bedroom door open tonight, just in case I need to walk somewhere in my sleep. Story 7. It wasn't unusual for the clock to be slightly off. The second hand moved with a sluggish grace, never quite in sync with time. The floorboards in the hallway creaked underfoot, each step a quiet reminder of something left unsaid. The dust collected on the windowsill, thicker than it should have been, but nobody seemed to notice or care. I watered the plants that didn't need it, felt the coolness of the soil seep through my fingers. The air was still, wrapped tightly around each room like a secret blanket. I turned the clock face down and walked away. The buzzing started again this morning. Not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind that lives inside your skull, vibrating against the back of your teeth. I've been getting these headaches that aren't quite headaches. They sit behind my eyes like warm water pressing outward when I try to remember what I did yesterday, or the day before. The days blur together now, each one folding into the next like pages in a wet book. I keep finding myself standing in doorways, not walking through them, just standing there, my hand resting on the frame. The wood feels different under my palm, warmer than it should be. Sometimes I catch myself counting the seconds I spend there, but the numbers never add up right. 17, 23, 41. Then I'm somewhere else entirely, no memory of moving. There were lights behind the trees. The shower runs cold now, even when I turn the handle all the way to hot. The water hits my skin with tiny pinpricks, and I notice marks I don't remember getting. Small circular impressions on my forearms, perfectly round, like someone pressed their fingertips there while I slept. They don't hurt. They should hurt, but they don't. I've started writing things down, but my handwriting looks different. The letters slant in ways they never used to, and sometimes I find notes I don't remember making. Simple things: check the door, listen for the sound, don't look up. The paper feels rough under my fingers like sandpaper, though it's the same notebook I've always used. The kitchen window faces east, but the light comes from the wrong direction. It streams in thick and golden, casting shadows that move when nothing else does. I make coffee and watch the steam rise in spirals that seem too perfect, too deliberate. The liquid tastes metallic, like I'm drinking dissolved coins. I pour it down the sink and make another cup, but the taste remains. I don't remember ever coming back. Sleep comes in fragments now. I close my eyes and feel myself sinking, not into dreams, but into something deeper. There are moments when I'm aware of lying in bed, but I can also feel myself standing somewhere else, somewhere cold, the sensation of grass under bare feet soaking through to my skin. Above me, the sky pulses with a rhythm I almost recognize. Almost. The alarm clock face still points downward. When I flip it over, the hands have moved to positions that make no sense. 3:17, 5:49, 11:11. I watch the second hand struggle against some invisible resistance, jerking forward in stuttered movements. The ticking sounds hollow, like it's coming from inside an empty box. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looks tired, more tired than I feel. The eyes staring back seem to know something I don't, holding secrets behind familiar irises. I lean closer and notice my pupils are larger than they should be, black circles that seem to pull light inward. When I blink, there's a delay before my reflection does the same. There were lights behind the trees, and they were counting. The telephone rings at odd hours, but when I answer, there's only silence. Not the silence of a dead line, but the silence of someone listening. I can feel attention pressing through the receiver, patient and watchful. Sometimes I hold the phone to my ear for minutes, breathing into the quiet, waiting for something that never comes. The dial tone, when it finally arrives, sounds lower than it used to. I find myself drawn to the basement door. It's painted white like all the others, but the paint seems fresher somehow, as if someone has been touching it up while I sleep. The handle turns easily under my grip, but I never quite manage to open it. Something always interrupts. A sound from upstairs, a sudden need to check the stove, a memory of something important I've forgotten. The grocery store feels different now. The aisles stretch longer than they should, and the fluorescent lights hum with that same frequency I feel in my teeth. Other shoppers move with a strange purposefulness, their carts gliding silently across linoleum that should squeak. I buy the same things I always buy, but when I get home, the bags contain items I don't remember selecting. Canned goods with labels in languages I can't identify. Produce that feels too smooth, too perfect. The noise didn't come from outside. My skin tingles at random moments, not itching, not pain, but a sensation like tiny electrical currents running just beneath the surface. It starts at my fingertips and spreads upward, following pathways that feel mapped out in advance. When it reaches my shoulders, my vision shifts slightly, colors becoming more saturated, edges more defined. The feeling passes, but it leaves behind a residue of awareness, as if my body is remembering something my mind has forgotten. I've begun to notice patterns in the wallpaper, shapes that weren't there before, or perhaps were always there but hidden in the design. They form connections across the wall, creating pathways that my eyes follow without conscious direction. The patterns seem to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, expanding and contracting in subtle waves. When I look directly at them, they become just wallpaper again, but in my peripheral vision, they continue their slow dance. The basement door stands slightly ajar now. I don't remember opening it, but there it is, a sliver of darkness visible through the gap. Cool air drifts upward, carrying scents of earth and something else, something sharp and clean like the air after lightning strikes. I approach slowly, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The darkness beyond the door seems to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm all its own. There were lights behind the trees, and they were counting, and I was supposed to be somewhere else. Time moves differently in the evening hours. Minutes stretch like taffy, each second dragging against the next. I sit in my chair and watch dust motes drift through shafts of dying sunlight. They move in formations that seem too organized, too intentional. Spirals within spirals, creating patterns that hurt to follow for too long. The light itself feels thick, almost tangible, like I could reach out and gather it in my hands. The mirror in the hallway reflects things that aren't there, shadows that move independently of their sources, shapes that linger at the edges of the frame just out of direct sight. I've started avoiding it, but sometimes I catch glimpses as I pass. My reflection waves when I'm not waving, smiles when I'm not smiling, mouths words I can't quite make out. Sleep brings dreams of standing in fields under stars that form letters in languages I don't recognize. The grass beneath my feet grows in geometric patterns, each blade perfectly placed. Above me, lights move with purpose, tracing symbols across the darkness. I try to remember the symbols when I wake, but they slip away like water through cupped hands, leaving only the impression of meaning just beyond reach. The basement door swings wider each day. The darkness beyond has texture now, layers of shadow that seem to have depth and substance. Sometimes I hear sounds from below, not footsteps or voices, but something like breathing. Slow, measured inhalations that seem to draw the air from the rest of the house. The floorboards creak in response, as if the house itself is settling into some new configuration. I don't remember ever coming back, but I must have, because here I am. The electrical outlets spark when I'm not looking. I see the flashes in my peripheral vision, brief bursts of blue-white light that leave afterimages dancing across my retinas. When I check them directly, they appear normal, but the air around them tastes of copper and ozone. The appliances hum in harmony now, creating a chord that resonates in my chest cavity. It's almost musical, this convergence of frequencies, almost beautiful. My handwriting has changed completely. The letters flow together in cursive patterns I never learned, forming words in scripts that look familiar but mean nothing. The pen moves across paper with its own momentum, and I find myself watching rather than directing. The messages are always simple, always urgent. They're waiting. Don't forget to listen. The door is almost open. The lights behind the trees pulse in sequences now. I watch from the kitchen window as they flash in patterns that feel like communication. One long, two short, three long pause. The rhythm embeds itself in my memory, playing back at odd moments throughout the day. I find myself tapping it out with my fingers, drumming it against tabletops and steering wheels. The pattern wants to be shared, wants to be passed along. There were lights behind the trees, and they were counting, and I was supposed to be somewhere else, but I went anyway. The basement door stands fully open now. The darkness beyond has given way to something that isn't quite light, but isn't darkness either. It's the color of twilight stretched thin, of shadows cast by invisible objects. The stairs descend into this not light, each step worn smooth by feet I don't remember using. The air rising from below carries promises of answers to questions I haven't learned to ask yet. My reflection has stopped pretending. When I look in mirrors now, it stares back with eyes that hold too much knowledge. It mouths words in perfect silence, and though I can't hear them, I understand their meaning. Soon, it says, very soon. Its smile is patient, knowing, tinged with something that might be pity. The clock face turned upward shows impossible times. Hours that don't exist, minutes that repeat, seconds that run backward. But somehow this makes more sense than it should. Time was never as linear as we pretended. It pools and eddies, flows in currents we can't see. The clock is simply being honest now, showing what was always true. The tingling in my skin has become constant, a low-level electrical current that makes my body feel more real and less real simultaneously. I am hyper-aware of every sensation while simultaneously feeling disconnected from physical experience. It's as if I'm receiving signals from somewhere else, transmissions that use my nervous system as an antenna. The wallpaper patterns have begun to move openly now, no longer hiding their motion in peripheral vision. They flow like slow water, forming new configurations that spell out messages in languages made of shape and movement. The walls breathe with them, expanding and contracting in rhythm with something vast and patient. I stand at the top of the basement stairs, looking down into the not light. The steps seem to descend much farther than they should, disappearing into depths that the house's foundation couldn't possibly contain. But I know I'll go down eventually. I've always been going down, in dreams and waking moments, in memories that haven't happened yet. The noise didn't come from outside, and it never stopped. The lights behind the trees have formed words now, burning letters against the darkness beyond my window. They spell out truths in languages I am beginning to understand, messages meant specifically for me. The trees themselves lean inward, their branches creating frames around the illuminated text, as if the entire landscape has become a book written in light and shadow. I take the first step down into the basement, and my foot finds purchase on something that isn't quite wood, isn't quite stone. The sensation travels up through my leg, a recognition that bypasses conscious thought. I have walked these stairs before, will walk them again, am walking them now in dimensions that exist parallel to this moment. The not light embraces me as I descend, and I realize it isn't absence but presence. It's the color of attention, of being observed by something vast and patient and impossibly kind. Each step brings me closer to remembering what I came here to forget, closer to understanding why forgetting was necessary in the first place. There were lights behind the trees, and they were counting, and I was supposed to be somewhere else, but I went anyway, and now I'm going back. The basement opens into spaces that couldn't exist within the house's walls, caverns of not light that stretch beyond sight. The air here tastes of copper and starlight, of promises kept and boundaries dissolved. I am not alone, have never been alone, will never be alone again. The presence that watches is patient and kind and impossibly vast, and it has been waiting for me to remember. But memory is dangerous. Memory changes things. Memory makes the impossible necessary and the necessary impossible. So I climb back up the stairs that may or may not exist, return to the house that may or may not be mine, sit in the chair that may or may not be real. The clock face points downward again. The second hand moves with sluggish grace, never quite in sync with time. I turn it over and watch the hands struggle against invisible resistance, marking hours that don't exist, minutes that repeat, seconds that run backward. It wasn't unusual for the clock to be slightly off. Story 8. The surface beneath my hands felt too slick, like touching a whisper trapped in silk. Luminescence curled around me with no sun or lamp to be found, painting the space in hues that flickered and shifted. My skin prickled, registering warmth without heat, an impossible sensation that tugged at the edges of panic. I tried to listen for my breath, for the reassuring in and out, but the air swallowed every sound before it reached my ears. Walls shimmered with a pulse that mimicked life, yet devoid of heartbeats. An awareness settled over me, prickling at the back of my mind's shadows without form, watching with intent. My limbs were mine, yet not entirely under my command, and I knew without knowing that I was not alone in this silence. Fragment asterisk. The humming came first, always the humming, a frequency that lived between my teeth, vibrating through bone and cartilage until my jaw ached. I taste copper pennies on my tongue when I remember it. The sound wasn't mechanical, wasn't electrical. It breathed, rose and fell like something sleeping. When I press my palms against my ears now in the safety of ordinary rooms, I can still feel it threading through my skull. The air around me had weight that day, pressing against my temples. I remember reaching out, my fingers grasping at nothing, searching for the source. The humming would stop just as my hand moved through the space where it seemed strongest, then start again behind me, always behind me. Fragment asterisk. Something watched from the corners where vision blurs. I felt its attention like heat radiating from a stove, but when I turned, only empty space greeted me. My peripheral vision caught movements that weren't there when I looked directly, a shifting, a settling, like fabric falling into place after being disturbed. I wasn't asleep, I'm certain of that detail. My feet were planted on solid ground, my hands gripping something cold and metallic, but the watching feeling persisted, patient and unwavering. I held my breath, counting heartbeats, waiting for whatever hid in my blind spots to reveal itself. The air grew thicker. My skin crawled with the sensation of being studied, catalogued, measured. I spoke aloud, asking if anyone was there. My voice came back wrong, distorted, like hearing yourself through water. Fragment asterisk. Thoughts arrived that weren't mine. They slipped into my consciousness wearing familiar clothes, disguised as my own internal voice, but they carried foreign flavors. I found myself thinking about places I'd never been, remembering conversations I'd never had. The thoughts felt oily, leaving residue in my mind that I couldn't scrub away. I'd reach for a memory of my childhood and find someone else's birthday party instead. Strange faces smiling at me with recognition I didn't share. I pressed my fingertips against my temples, trying to massage away the intrusion, but the alien thoughts burrowed deeper. They whispered suggestions in languages I didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. My own voice became a stranger's voice inside my head, commenting on things I wasn't thinking about, noticing details my eyes hadn't seen. Fragment asterisk. Light exploded without warning, not gradual, not gentle. It erupted from everywhere and nowhere, searing white-hot intensity that turned my vision into television static. I remember my arms flying up to shield my face, but the light came from inside too, blazing behind my eyelids. The world dissolved into pure brightness. Objects became suggestions, shadows became impossible. In that blinding moment, I heard something massive shifting, rearranging itself around me. Metal groaning, glass singing. The sound of space being folded. When the light finally dimmed, everything felt rearranged. The room I stood in was the same room, but wrong. Walls where there had been openings, openings where walls should be. My hands shook as I reached out to touch surfaces that felt different under my palms, textured like scales, warm like living skin. Fragment asterisk. The taste won't leave my mouth, metallic and sharp, like licking batteries or breathing in lightning strikes. It coats my tongue even now, weeks later, months later. Time feels negotiable when I think about it. I wake up some mornings with that flavor flooding my senses, and I know I've been back there in my sleep. My teeth ache, my gums feel tender. I run my tongue along my teeth, and they feel different, unfamiliar geography in my own mouth. The metallic taste intensifies when I'm alone, when rooms grow too quiet. I've started keeping music playing constantly, anything to drown out the silence that brings back that flavor. I catch myself checking mirrors, opening my mouth wide, searching for changes I can't name. My reflection looks back with eyes that seem surprised to see me. Fragment asterisk. But that's not how it happened. The light was gentle, wasn't it? Soft and golden, wrapping around me like warm honey. I remember feeling safe, protected, cradled by the luminescence. There was no explosion, no violence, just a gradual brightening like dawn breaking in slow motion. I wasn't afraid. I was curious, reaching out to touch the light with my fingertips. It felt solid, substantial, like touching liquid glass. The humming was pleasant then, almost musical, harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. I wanted to stay in that brightness forever. I remember smiling, feeling chosen, special. The watching presence wasn't menacing but benevolent, caring, interested in my well-being. When the light faded, I felt loss, abandonment, like a parent leaving a child alone in the dark. Which memory is real? They both feel true, equally vivid, equally mine. Fragment asterisk. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding requires logic, and logic belongs to the world I used to inhabit. Now I exist in the spaces between certainty and doubt, between memory and imagination. The fragments visit me when they choose, not when I summon them. I've learned to let them come and go without grasping, without trying to arrange them into neat sequences. Some nights I wake with the taste of metal and light on my tongue. Some days I catch movement in my peripheral vision and don't bother turning to look. The humming visits less frequently now, but when it comes, I don't fight it. I've changed, and the change is permanent. I carry something foreign in my thoughts, something that watches the world through my eyes and finds it fascinating. I am no longer entirely myself, and perhaps that's exactly as it should be. The surface beneath my hands still feels too slick sometimes when I'm not paying attention, when I let my guard down. I've stopped asking why. Story 9. It was the faint hiss of static creeping in like a fog. At first I thought it was the old radio in the kitchen, left on low, but the dials were turned to silence. The sound pulsed softly, weaving through the quiet of the room. Each undulating note felt misplaced, as if it resonated from a memory obscured by time, a memory that didn't quite belong to me. I moved toward the source, an invisible trail leading to the corner where shadows pooled thickly. My skin tingled, a familiar shiver settling around my shoulders. I hadn't felt this way since the last time. The smell hits me first when I try to remember. Copper pennies left in rain, mixed with something burning that shouldn't burn. It clings to the back of my throat like smoke from wet leaves, except there were no leaves, no fire, just that metallic tang that makes my teeth ache when I breathe too deeply. Sometimes I catch it again, walking past certain doorways or when the air conditioning kicks on. The same smell, exactly the same, and my hands start to shake before I even realize why. I wasn't alone in that room. I know this the way you know someone's watching you from behind, that prickle between your shoulder blades that makes you turn around. But when I turned, nothing, just the space where something should have been. The air felt thick there, pressed down like invisible weight. My breathing changed, became shallow and quick. Was I awake? The edges of everything seemed soft, dreamlike, but my heart was pounding too hard for sleep. Something moved in my peripheral vision, always just outside where I could focus. When I tried to look directly, the movement stopped, but the feeling remained, presence without form. My thoughts scattered like birds. One moment I was reaching for the light switch, the next I was thinking about my childhood bedroom, then suddenly about the texture of concrete under bare feet. None of these thoughts felt like mine. They arrived complete foreign, as if someone else's memories were bleeding through static into my head. I tried to focus on where I was, what I was doing, but concentration slipped away like water through cupped hands. The room kept shifting around me, not visually, but in some deeper way. Familiar corners felt wrong. The ceiling seemed higher, then lower. My own voice sounded strange when I whispered my name aloud. The light came in pulses, not from any lamp or window, but from everywhere at once, like the air itself was glowing. Bright enough to hurt, then gone, leaving purple afterimages dancing across my vision. In those flashes, objects appeared that weren't there in the darkness between. A chair where no chair belonged. Patterns on the walls that vanished when the light died. The pulses had rhythm, almost like breathing, but too slow, too deep. Each flash revealed more wrongness, furniture rearranged, shadows falling upward, my own reflection in surfaces that shouldn't reflect. The silence between the pulses felt heavier than the light itself. The headache started 3 days later, not regular pain, but something that sits behind my left eye like a warm marble. It throbs in time with my heartbeat, and when it gets bad, I hear that static again, faint but unmistakable. I've started avoiding mirrors because sometimes my reflection takes a half second too long to follow my movements. Small things feel different now. Water tastes metallic. Colors seem slightly off, like someone adjusted the contrast on reality. I catch myself staring at empty corners, waiting for something to move. My sleep is full of that copper smell and the memory of light that came from nowhere. But wait, the light wasn't pulsing, was it? I remember now, or think I do. It was steady, unwavering, coming from a single point above me, harsh and clinical, like hospital lighting, but wrong somehow. Too white, too clean. It cast no shadows, which made everything look flat, two-dimensional. I was lying down, I think, staring up at it, unable to move my head to look away. The light hummed, a low frequency that I felt in my bones more than heard. My skin felt cold under its glare, but also somehow exposed, as if the light could see through me. How long was I there? Minutes, hours. Time moved strangely, stretching and compressing like elastic. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding requires facts, and facts need to stay in one shape. Mine keep changing, shifting when I'm not looking directly at them. I've learned to live with the gaps, the inconsistencies, the way certain memories feel more like dreams and certain dreams feel too real to dismiss. The static comes back sometimes, usually when I'm almost asleep. I don't follow it anymore. I don't investigate. I've accepted that some part of me was left in that room, and some part of that room came back with me. The boundaries got blurred somehow, mixed up. I am not exactly who I was before, and I have stopped trying to figure out exactly who I am now. Some questions are better left unasked. Some memories are better left incomplete. Story 10. It wasn't unusual for the door to creak open on its own. The floorboards always groaned underfoot, a sound that blended seamlessly with the ticking clock in the hallway. I noticed the window was slightly ajar again, letting in a draft that ruffled the curtains just enough to catch my eye. The box in the corner looked out of place, yet I didn't bother to move it back. The pattern on the wallpaper seemed to shift each day, a mosaic of shadows that never settled. It was easy to pretend I had forgotten to fix it. As I left the room, I didn't bother pulling the door closed. I knew it wouldn't stay that way. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does. I'm writing this because I can't carry it anymore. The weight of it, the knowing, the not knowing. 3 weeks now, or maybe 4, I've been sitting at this same desk, watching the same door that won't stay closed, and I finally understand that some things need to be written down, even if they're never meant to be read. Especially if they're never meant to be read. You have to understand, I was never the type to believe in things I couldn't explain. I fixed problems. I organized closets and balanced checkbooks and made sure the coffee pot was clean before bed. But now I'm writing to someone who might not exist about something that might not have happened, and somehow that feels like the most honest thing I've ever done. It started with the humming. Not music exactly, more like the sound a refrigerator makes when it's working too hard, but softer, warmer. It would come in the early hours when the house was supposed to be quiet, threading through the walls like water finding cracks. I'd wake up and lie there listening, trying to place it, but it always seemed to be coming from the next room over. Always the next room over. The first time I got up to investigate, I found myself standing in the hallway in my bare feet, the hardwood cold against my skin. The humming had stopped, but the door to the spare room was open again, and I knew I had closed it before bed. I always closed it before bed. I should have paid more attention to the small things then, the way my reflection looked tired even after a full night's sleep, the way the mailman started avoiding eye contact, the way my own handwriting looked different on grocery lists, like someone else had been borrowing my hands. But you don't notice these things when they're happening. You notice them later, when you're trying to piece together when everything started to change, when you started to change. The humming came back the next night, and the next, each time a little clearer, like someone adjusting the frequency on an old radio. I started leaving the door open just to see what would happen, just to see if it made a difference. Well, it didn't. Or maybe it did, and that's the problem. I remember standing in that doorway, looking into the spare room where nothing had changed and everything was different. The box in the corner, I still don't know where it came from. Brown cardboard, no writing, no tape marks. It just appeared one day like it had always been there, and when I tried to move it, my hands went right through. Not like it was a ghost or anything dramatic like that. More like my hands forgot how to be solid for just a moment, like I forgot how to be solid. That's when the watching started. You know that feeling when someone's looking at you from across a room, that prickle between your shoulder blades. Imagine that, but the room is empty. Imagine that, but you're alone in your house at 2 in the morning, and the feeling doesn't go away when you turn around. It follows you to the kitchen when you get water. It sits with you at the breakfast table. It rides in the passenger seat of your car. I started checking mirrors more often, not out of vanity, but to make sure I was still there, still recognizable. The person looking back seemed to be wearing my face, but something behind the eyes was different. Older maybe, or younger, like time was moving at a different speed for the reflection than it was for me. My sister called last week, or the week before. Time feels slippery now, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. She said she'd been trying to reach me for days, but I checked my phone constantly. No missed calls, no messages. We talked for 20 minutes about her job and her kids and the weather, and when I hung up, I realized I couldn't remember the sound of her voice. I tried calling her back. The number was disconnected. I tried looking her up online. No social media profiles, no address listings, no trace of someone I've known my entire life. Maybe I made her up. Maybe I made up a lot of things. The humming is constant now, not just at night, but threading through my days like background music in a store you can't quite identify. Sometimes I catch myself humming along, and I have to stop and listen to what's coming out of my mouth. It's not a tune I recognize, but my throat knows it like a lullaby I learned before I could walk. I've been avoiding the spare room, but it doesn't matter. The door stays open now no matter what I do. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in there from the corner of my eye, but when I turn to look directly, it's just the box and the shifting wallpaper and the window that's always slightly ajar. I tried closing the window once, locked it tight, checked it twice. The next morning it was open again, and there were wet footprints on the floor leading from the window to the door. Small prints like a child's, but the spacing was all wrong, too far apart, too deliberate. I followed them down the hallway, through the kitchen, to the back door. They ended at the threshold, as if whoever made them had simply evaporated at the boundary between inside and outside. Or maybe they started there. Maybe something came in instead of going out. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I dream of the humming, but in the dreams it has words. Not English words, not any language I recognize, but I understand them anyway. They're calling something home, or maybe they're calling something away. The meaning shifts like smoke, and I wake up with the taste of copper in my mouth and the feeling that I've forgotten something important. My hands shake when I write now. Look at this handwriting, how it wavers and loops like an old woman's script. I'm 34 years old, was 34 years old. Age feels negotiable now, like everything else. The grocery store clerk asked for my ID yesterday when I bought wine, then looked at it for a long time with a confused expression. She handed it back without a word, but I could see her watching me in the security mirror as I left. I looked at the ID in my car. The photo looked like me, but the birth date was wrong, off by decades. I don't know which date is real anymore. I've been thinking about my childhood lately, trying to anchor myself to something solid, something I know happened. But the memories feel borrowed, like stories someone told me about someone else's life. Did I really have a dog named Charlie? Did I really break my arm falling out of that tree? Did I really live in that house with the yellow kitchen and the squeaky step? Or did I just dream those things into existence the same way I might have dreamed my sister into existence? The worst part is the certainty that none of this is real, coupled with the equally strong certainty that all of it is real, that I'm losing my mind, and that my mind is the only thing keeping me tethered to whatever I'm becoming. Sometimes I stand in front of the bathroom mirror and practice being human. I smile and frown and raise my eyebrows, watching to make sure the reflection does the same things at the same time. Mostly it does, mostly. But there are moments, just flashes, when the reflection moves first, and I find myself following its lead like a puppet learning its strings. The humming is getting louder, or maybe I'm getting better at hearing it. It seems to be coming from inside my chest now, vibrating through my ribs like a second heartbeat. When I put my hand over my heart, I can feel both rhythms, slightly out of sync, creating a flutter that makes me dizzy. I think something is trying to find its way home, and I think I might be the door. I don't know how much longer I can keep this door closed, or if I should keep it closed. Maybe whatever's on the other side has been waiting patiently, and maybe it's tired of waiting. Maybe it's already here, looking out through my eyes, writing with my hands. Maybe I've been gone for a while now, and what's left is just an echo learning how to pretend. If you find this letter, if you're reading these words, then maybe I was real once. Maybe this house was real, and the creaking door was real, and the humming was just the sound old houses make when they're settling into themselves. But if you go upstairs and find the spare room with the door that won't stay closed, if you see the box in the corner and hear the humming in the walls, then you'll know that some things don't settle. Some things just wait. And if you start to notice that your reflection looks tired, or that people avoid your eyes, or that your handwriting looks different on grocery lists. If you start to feel like you're being watched by empty rooms. If you find yourself humming songs you've never heard. Then maybe you should write a letter too. Maybe you should leave a record of who you were before you become whatever comes next. The door is opening again. I can hear it from here, that familiar creak that used to annoy me and now sounds almost like welcome. The humming is so loud now that I can barely hear my own thoughts, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe thinking was always the problem. I'm going to leave this letter on the desk and walk upstairs. I'm going to stand in that doorway and look into the spare room where the box waits in the corner and the window stays slightly ajar. I'm going to listen to the humming until I understand what it's trying to tell me. And if I don't come back down, if whoever finds this letter finds only an empty house with doors that won't stay closed, then at least there will be some record that I was here, that I tried to hold on, that I was human once, even if I can't remember what that felt like. The wallpaper is shifting again. The shadows are settling into new patterns. It's time to go home.